Hello and welcome to Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and this is the Supernatural Fandom track. And today we're talking about how fandom takes care of its own. Supernatural has certainly dealt with a number of different issues around mental health in the plot and with the characters. And some of the actors have come forward and talked about some of their struggles in this regard, both in videos and at conventions, and in the pages of books like Family Don't End with Blood. So today we're going to talk about some of the ways that Supernatural has spun out into the real world in terms of helping fans, connecting fans, and making sure that the fandom family does indeed take care of its own. So let's do introductions. April, kick us off.
I'm April Vian. I'm a regional representative with Random Acts, a nonprofit started by Misha Collins, the Angel Castiel on Supernatural.
And Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Cook. I am a sociology professor and I live in Denver, Colorado, and I teach sociology in Aurora at a community college, and I've also been researching fandom-based charity work for the past 4 years with my research partner, Kayla Joseph, as a part of Always Keep Nerd Fighting.
Awesome. Now, a lot of conventions and fandoms interact with charity work by having people in costume visit hospitals or doing canned food drives. Supernatural kind of takes this whole thing to a completely different level. And that's one of the wonderful and special things about the show and the cast and the fandom. Let's talk about where did Random Acts come from and how did it connect to the show? You said Misha Collins started it. Talk about how Random Acts got started and what it has grown into and what it does, please.
Okay. So yeah, Random Acts was founded by Misha Collins in 2010. We're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary next month. The initial idea was to change the world one act of kindness at a time. So they do that a few different ways. We have events, we have fundraisers. The biggest thing that we do is kindness acts. Anybody can propose an act of kindness to do, and that can be something really small, like getting groceries for an elderly person or a single mom. It can be much bigger things, donations to really large food banks. We've helped other nonprofits with fundraisers and that kind of thing. I just myself completed an act where we donated some really needed supplies to a nonprofit here that helps women get out of sex trafficking and prostitution. So it's really across the board. We've done things with gardening, with playgrounds, with schools, with individuals, with other nonprofits. It's grown considerably from just a few people to, I don't even know how many are in the organization now. About 6 years ago, Rachel Miner, she played Meg on Supernatural, it became our executive director. Between her and Misha, we started having more of a presence at these Supernatural conventions. And while we're there, we spread our message, not only what we do as a nonprofit, but we always partner with a local agency and collect donations while we're at the conventions. So usually that ends up being hygiene supplies or clothes, things like that for homeless shelters, but we've also collected things for veterinary hospitals and other nonprofits, depending on the city that we're in.
So does Random Acts carry on all year long? Is it seasonal? Is it tied to anything in particular?
No, we are worldwide. We are completely ran by volunteers. Nobody gets paid, from Misha and Rachel and the board all the way down to the people that you see at the conventions. They're all volunteers. We always have different things going on. We had a muck in the spring. That's our annual Melee of Kindness. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's a day. I think it was a week this time, and we just encourage people to do as many random acts of kindness as they can. This year was a little challenging because we were doing that socially distanced. So we've had a lot of brainstorming ideas on how we can spread kindness from 6 feet away. That's been really a big topic of conversation lately. We did, in the past, we've had like hunger acts. The year before last was a really big thing and a focal point where we were raising money and giving it to food banks and making sure that children had meals and that kind of thing. This year, our focus has shifted a little bit more, and we've been really looking at how we can help people that have been impacted by COVID and nonprofits that are really responding to the pandemic in different ways. I think next year we're looking at maybe urban farming, if I have heard that right, and putting a lot of our focus there. So we always have one really big thing that we're kind of focused on, but people can submit their own acts. There's a form on our website that's pretty easy to fill out if there's something that you want to do for an individual or your community. And that can be done all year.
Okay. And so is Random Act something, it sounds organized and disorganized. If somebody says, wow, this sounds like something I want to be part of, how does that happen?
Well, if you go to the website, randomacts.org, we have a list of vacancies, of volunteer positions that are available. So it would really depend on your skill set, your experience, how much time you want to commit, and what you really want to do for the organization. What I do for the organization is completely unrelated to my day job, and that was done kind of deliberately because I don't want to kind of do that same thing all the time. There's other people that we need, like IT people, project organizers. There's a lot of other things other than what I do with Random Acts that can be done. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved.
And that's all year long, all the time?
Yep, and worldwide. So location does not matter.
And it sounds like, especially now, there are a lot of ways that you can be involved and still be virtual or, you know, not actually have to be in person to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more common that we all kind of do things virtually, even pre-pandemic, because we're so widespread, because we are a worldwide organization. We've never had everybody in one place. Some of us go to events and do fundraiser things and go in person to other nonprofits, but a lot of us really just contribute in different ways from our own homes.
Okay. Now we just finished up not too long ago, Gish's Week. And of course, that's the greatest internet scavenger hunt the world has ever seen. Misha plays a big role in that as well. Which came first, Gish or Random Acts, or how do they interact, or is Misha the common link? I've never been quite sure about that.
We get asked this a lot. I believe Random Acts came first. Gish is kind of our crazy cousin, where we're kind of connected but not the same. So Random Acts is a nonprofit. Gish is not a nonprofit. So a lot of times we do receive donations through some of the Gish items. Misha is obviously involved in both. I think Gish was his brainchild initially, and that's grown considerably over the last several years. But that one is, the biggest difference is that they're for profit and Random Acts is a nonprofit. So we're kind of related to each other, but not really.
And I noticed that usually in Gish, there are some of the tasks that people can choose from with their team do have a charitable aspect to it, or some kind of hopeful aspect to it, in terms of sharing a message or kind of spearheading a short-term donation, something like that plays out a lot of times as some of the Gish options people can choose.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's probably Misha's influence and the other people that he surrounds himself with that choose these things, that come up with the items to make sure there's something that everybody can do. So we have the creative stuff and the art stuff, but the kindness is an important part of that, particularly this year, I think.
Tanya, you've been quiet up till now. Anything you want to jump in on Random Acts or Gish?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
You bet. No, I was just waiting for my turn. So yeah, that's great. And I think I just would add that my understanding is Gish was inspired by a scavenger hunt that Misha participated in when he went to college at the University of Chicago called SCAV. So even the acronym, but it had all these different kinds of tasks and they would have to get them done, and they were very fun. So for folks who don't know, it's sort of part performance art, part norm breaking, as we sociologists would call it, part, charity. And it's everything from taking cookies to your local firefighters, right, and surprising them with something fun, to signing up to be a blood marrow donor, to fundraising for victims of survivors, I should say, survivors of genocide in Rwanda, and all these change of life items that are really large each year. And the networking power of it is just fascinating and fantastic. And that's what interests me as a sociologist. My understanding, without knowing a lot about this, so this is just a bit of my outside perspective, is the reason GISH is a for-profit and RandomX is not, is in part due to bureaucratic limitations of how nonprofits have to file with taxation and things like that. So it's not, I don't believe the goal of GISH is to like capitalistically make a ton of money for someone. So I just don't want listeners to get the wrong impression by that distinction. I think it's completely about bureaucracy and paperwork and things like that.
And that nonprofits have a lot more rules on what they can and can't do than you do as a for-profit, and you can still be, you can still have charitable goals as a for-profit. There, it again gets back into all the backroom stuff.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think GISH does have, they're large enough that they need to have employees. So there are employees who make a living. I don't know how many. Okay, April maybe can speak to that, but yeah, exactly. So I just wanted people to have a sense of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I notice with GISH, and I've only GISHed for 2 years, is that even the simplest things have a thoughtful edge to them. I was really only able to participate by picking some of the simplest things I could do this year because my calendar was full up, current unpleasantness and all. But even they had you stop and think about something, or had you do something out of your comfort zone or out of your norm. And then of course, some of them are much more, well, in other years, much more public and performative. This year, everything was distanced. But you touched on networking, and I think that is one of the things that I see in some of the GISH options is, you know, going to that whole 6 degrees of separation, that we're only ever 6 people away from anybody in the world if you just knew the right 6 people. And sometimes GISH challenges leverage that in terms of getting to someone with a bigger platform to get a message out into the world, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. So I do have to, I have to be an academic buzzkill on the 6 degrees of separation. That's actually based on social science research by Stanley Milgram. And it turns out the way that he demonstrated that wasn't completely random. Okay, that said, with that little asterisk,
6 or 7 people down the line.
You're right. Your bigger point about absolutely the way that we can use social media for good, right? As April said, a lot of these activities and the way that RandomX provides opportunities to do activism and charity work being based on not having to be physically in a space together is fantastic, because it allows for people who are extremely busy, who work full time, who are all over the world to participate. And there's a little bit of denigration, I guess, or sort of looking down your nose at sort of online activism versus in person showing up to protest. But what I can tell you based on research is that that sustained collective action that happens online, that is more impactful, if you will, than often a one-off sort of in-person demonstration. Not that they're both important is what I'm saying. And I think that because RandomX and GISH already have like instituted that model, that really helps for right now, the adaptation during this time. And so I think that's really powerful and important, and that's why I'm studying it.
I think it's also important to let people know that just because they can't go out in public the way they used to, or they're being very careful about their health or the health of a loved one, and so making sure they're, you know, as distanced as they can be, they can still make a difference. It's not like being stuck at home really means being cut off from the world thanks to social media. And I think that's really important for people to hear, that you're not alone. You don't have to be alone because of all these ways to connect, to do good into the world, and also to receive good. It feels good to do good.
You bet. I was pulling up that's what I was looking at earlier. I was pulling up some slides I had put together for a presentation on the benefits to individuals of volunteerism and charity work. And basically what I can tell you, and I'm happy to share this with folks if they're interested, is that from volunteering, if you go from monthly to weekly volunteering, it's a 16% increase in happiness, which is the equivalence of getting a massive annual raise in salary, basically, in terms of how happy that makes you. So it's not that money doesn't buy happiness, but volunteering also buys happiness. I don't know, just to tease a bit about that, but they've actually tried to study that, and I think that's really interesting.
And definitely something that people really need to know about now, because not only can you make a positive impact in the world from home, but hey, you know, if you aren't feeling a little blue, a little down right now, you're probably not paying attention. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And so anything that helps you boost your own mood and feel connected in a positive way and feel like you're making a positive impact is also a huge plus. Which kind of ties right into the whole Always Keep Fighting campaign that Jared Padalecki started. Let's talk a little bit about how that intersects with things like Random Acts and GISH and the whole supernatural family don't end with blood kind of ethos that's part of this wonderful fandom.
As far as I know, Always Keep Fighting isn't really connected to Random Acts. I think all of the cast members support each other's efforts in whatever way that may be. So you do see some overlap where one person is kind of featuring or talking about someone else's campaign or message, but there's not a direct correlation that I'm aware of between those two things. Tanya might have more information than I do actually on that part of it.
I don't. I will just add, I believe you're right. And from what I know, looking at my notes, Always Keep Fighting started as a fundraising and mental health awareness campaign in 2015, 2016-ish. And the t-shirts sales started with a partnership with, I think it was Represent. I'm not positive which company they originally worked with, but they created the t-shirt design after fans surprised Jared and everyone at, I want to say it was 2015 or 2016 SDCC, San Diego Comic-Con. They dimmed all the lights and the fans all lit lights to show solidarity for Jared's mental health challenges, or him being open with his mental health struggles. I hope this is coming across well. And so after that, they did t-shirt sales to benefit organizations like Attitudes in Reverse, which I think is a fandom-based nonprofit, not started by celebrities, but started by supernatural fans, that seeks to prevent suicide and seeks to help support mental health issues among youth, and To Write Love on Her Arms, which is an already existing charity. And then from there, there's been other campaigns started that don't have the specific association with this campaign, but have similar themes and connections. So I can talk more about that, but just to clarify that relationship, one more point is after that, a company started called Stands. And now a lot of the t-shirt or merchandise sales that you see, Stands actually works with, or they're run through Stands. So this shirt, Wayward Forever, for example, is a Stands collaboration between Brianna Buckmaster and Kim Rhodes. And the proceeds go to New Leash on Life, which is a different charity. So it's still based in fandom, connected with fandom, plus they often feature artwork by fandom artists, artists who are fans and submit things. So that's just to kind of trace that whole line through. So they maybe didn't begin with that shirt campaign, but that's now the Rise campaign you're seeing to support people experiencing breast cancer issues and support breast cancer research, right? That is through Stands, and you've seen everyone share photos of that.
Well, and for folks who may not have been caught up on some of the elements of supernatural fandom history, back in 2015, Jared left a convention abruptly because he needed to deal with his mental health, and that's been very public, very well documented. And he wrote an incredibly moving and candid chapter in Lynn Zubernis's Family Don't End with Blood about what he was going through and the depths of his depression and how serious a situation that was. And that chapter alone has really meant so much to fans who struggle with all kinds of mental illness, but particularly anxiety and depression. And so that also, once things started to get better, Jared came forward and spoke about things very publicly, very candidly, which then tends to create a safe space for fans to talk about the same issues in their lives or to learn more, to want to get involved, which ties right back into some of these things. In fact, there's also a supernatural peer-to-peer counseling effort that I think is tied into I'm Alive. And talk a little bit about how that works.
So I will go. You've heard enough from me, but I'll kick this off again. Yeah, I've actually interviewed fans who have volunteered for the Supernatural Crisis. It's called the Crisis Support Network, and it's text or chat based, I believe. But essentially, one of the T-shirt campaigns, "You Are Not Alone," I believe it was. The proceeds from that went to fund training for volunteers to get kind of crisis. It's sort of like the mental health equivalent of an EMT, right? When an EMT shows up, they have medical skills and knowledge, and they're like trying to get you to the next place of support. And my understanding is that's what these folks are doing through the crisis support hotline. And so that you need training to be able to do that, of course. And so these proceeds went to fund a certain number of volunteers, and they asked for something like 1,000 or 1,200 volunteers, and they filled those positions within, an hour or two. And they were just astonished at how quickly people were willing to step up and help with this. And I also and I'll let April speak, but one more thing I want to add about the significance of Jared speaking up that I think is really important to note is first of all, he's a younger man and he's wealthy, right? He has a lot of social privilege. And I think it's really significant for people to see a man talking about struggles with depression, because there's a lot of gendered problems with men feeling comfortable seeking help, admitting they have issues. And I think I mentioned the wealth issue is this is someone who's extremely busy, works extremely hard. But on the surface, a lot of us lay people look at someone like Jared and think, well, he's wealthy, that solves all kinds of problems. And mental health does not care where you are socially located. Okay. So I think it's just really important to see someone who has what we would identify as, the American dream, right? And still has these issues. And so that helps reduce that stigma for all people. But I think it's especially important as a message for men to see, like, look, getting help is not weakness. Everyone needs help. And that validation is really important.
There are quotes of Jared and clips from him talking about this at conventions where he owns that. And he said, I'm starring in a TV show. I'm well off. I have a good family. My family loves me. None of that matters. This is biology. This has nothing to do with all of those things. And his chapter in Family Don't End with Blood is really taking you through almost moment by moment with him just trying to get home safely from the convention that was in Europe to his family, his wife and his family in Austin, and make it home. And it's a really, again, to have somebody in such a public persona, and also celebrity has its fragility as well, because so much of it is image. And so to take the risk of coming out and saying, I have really struggled with this. I was not okay. There is a potential career risk with that. There is a perception risk with that. People coming forward in that kind of visibility, that's a scary thing. And it's a wonderful gift because they're willing to take those risks and that potential downside in order to help others. And I think that that's a really special thing about so many of the cast members, Jared, Jensen, Misha, Brianna, so many of them have stepped up to talk about these things. Samantha Smith has been very, very open about her current struggle with breast cancer. And that opens the door for fans, I think, to be able to talk with other fans, to admit to themselves, it helps to know that other people are dealing with the same thing. April, any thoughts on all of this?
As a representative of a random acts, not necessarily. As a mental health professional, several.
Dividing line.
Yeah, take off one hat for another. No, I agree with Tanya with most of that. That's kind of how her and I met each other, actually, was through that kind of thing. I work in behavioral health, and I was really interested in the work that she was doing for much of the same reason. It's unusual to find that many people that will talk that openly about that kind of struggle in one space, and having the freedom to say that, yes, this is how I feel, this is how I think, this is something I struggle with, and be accepted and be able to have a conversation about it rather than having to apologize for it, really is something that separates, I think, the fandom from a lot of other groups. And it leads into people being more willing to help, to being more charitable, to being more willing to start things like, as Tanya mentioned, Attitudes in Reverse earlier, and that was started by Trish Baker after she lost her teenage son to suicide. And one of the first things that she did to help comfort her daughter was take her to a supernatural convention. And this was when Jared was going through his things. Trish is a friend of mine outside of Random Acts, which is why I have this information. And that was a big thing for her. That's what inspired her to start Attitudes in Reverse. It's grown exponentially since then. She goes to schools all over the country talking about bullying and the signs of teen suicide. And that's a conversation that just wouldn't have happened had the cast not been as open as they are about their own struggles in such a public forum.
And there's also, I want to mention Supernatural Survivors, which is a similar fandom-based nonprofit focused on suicide prevention that also goes to cons and has support there for folks, because what was happening at cons, as wonderful as they are, and April has a whole book on conventions, so shout out for that too. What happens there is it's so emotionally intense that some folks feel overwhelmed, and it's, if you can imagine like what it's like to be at something like, if you're a sports fan, if you go to a concert, some kind of live performance, it's wonderful, but it can also just overwhelm your emotional processing center. I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, sociologist. And so they have support tables there, and they often work with, I think it's Matt Cohen who works with them quite a bit, and that's Carla Truxell, I believe, and it was unfortunately her nephew who passed, and she found comfort in Supernatural after that trauma. And frankly, that's a fairly common way that people get into Supernatural or into fandom, is having a difficult time in their lives or going through something really difficult and finding solace in this show. I just want to mention that because that is something we've seen in our interviews with fans, and she also has a great chapter in Family Don't End in Blood.
Well, I think one of the things that Lynn Zubernis brings up in Supernatural Fangirls and Fandom at the Crossroads, as well as her other books, and Lynn is a clinical psychologist, PhD in psychology, will actually be, we've heard from Lynn on several panels thus far on Continual. We have some other panels on this topic with some of the psychologists who have written supernaturally themed books on psychology and stress and dealing with mental health issues. But one of the key things that Lynn brings up in those early books is also about how conventions can create a safe space and can help people connect with others when maybe in their day-to-day life, there isn't anybody else around who shares their passion for the show and for geeky things and for fandom. And some of the issues around being a female fan and how that still has a lot of stigma to fight. We're not supposed to be that excited about anything except our, significant other and kids. And so there's some blowback on that. And so when you find this safe space and then you have to leave and go home, there can be, it can make everything better while you're there and make everything better in some ways after you go home. But then there's gee, I just had to leave my people. And that can kind of be a dip as well. So hence the importance of all of these online and ongoing social media ways to connect with the people who share what we love.
Can I jump in for a minute on that?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where our work picks up a bit. Me and Kayla looking at fandom-based activism, and we look at Supernatural a lot because we're both part of that fandom and that's how we met, but we look at other fandoms as well. And it's that what you're talking about, I think, in terms of coming into a con and feeling like, oh, this is my group. I don't have to apologize for who I am. I can feel all these emotions. I can connect with other folks. We think that's really important, and that's called collective identity in social science literature. And so it's that collective identity combined with the collective effervescence, which is the shared feels you get at cons. And then the way it's sustained, I think, in online and social media relationships that translates into, if you will, if I can mix all my metaphors, like a sustaining critical reaction, a critical mass of, and then that turns into collective action. So that's, I'm kind of going from that individual psychological piece into looking at, okay, how does that translate into changing the world, right? The way that fans are. And I think that's, it's so inspiring and so fantastic. So I just wanted to chime in on that. And I had another point. Oh, April and I don't think we've ever met in person. We probably would have. We would have this year, possibly at Supernatural Denver or another con. But it's, I have got friends who I feel that I know very well now, and I've never actually physically been in the same space with them. So it's just, that is not an uncommon experience for folks to have either through Gish or through these different participatory forms of fandom.
Which is so important, especially now. It's always important, but it's particularly important now that people aren't traveling, aren't going to some of these social gatherings. Staying home, staying in your bubble can make you feel very isolated. And having a fandom that you can connect with, whether it's doing watch parties or hanging out online or just having that human connection, even if it's at a distance, is so important right now for sustaining your mood and your health. One of the other pieces that the Always Keep Fighting campaign created for me was, I'm an author. I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy. I do a lot of genre conventions. And right about the time the Always Keep Fighting campaign came out, we were at a local convention and there was a panel on mental health. And some of our authors who were also in their day job, doctors or nurses or mental health professionals, were talking about it. Nobody expected the reaction to that. This was not a Supernatural convention. This was a general sci-fi fantasy convention. They had standing room only in the panel room. The panel went overly long. They kind of had to herd people out of the room because people wanted to talk. Then people wanted to find a way that they could continue the conversation online. And it became really clear to those of us involved with the genre and with programming that there was a big need to talk about this in general fandom. And I kind of looked at it and said, I don't know any actors, but I know an awful lot of authors. And when we are candid with each other, most of us have struggled at some point in our lives with some element of mental health issues. Largely, you know, a lot of that's depression and anxiety, but there are so many other pieces of that. And so I started reaching out to my author friends and saying, hey, I think it would be very meaningful to readers and fans if the people that wrote their favorite books, the people that kind of create the genres that they love, talked candidly about how mental health issues have affected them, either personally or how they have been affected by people close to them, or how it's affected the kind of stories that they write and the kind of characters that they create. And that led to the creation of a blog project called Hold On to the Light, very directly inspired by the Always Keep Fighting campaign from Supernatural Fandom. And in that right now, it's kind of an ongoing thing, but we have, I think we're around 175 authors who have written tremendously candid essays about the impact of mental health and bipolar depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and all kinds of things that have made an impact on them in their writing. And the whole idea was to speak out about it to make a safer space for fans. Because if your favorite author talks about this, then it's not as scary for you to say, yeah, it's me too, you know. So by putting ourselves out there and talking about it first, we wanted to create an area for discussion and a way for people to be able to feel like participating in fandom was safe and inclusive. And we've done a number of in-person panels on Hold On to the Light. Those tend to be very, very emotional, where the people on the panel, all of whom are authors who have done essays for the project, talk about their, whatever they want to talk about in relation to mental health and how it impacts them. And we always have people come up afterwards and go, oh my God, thank you so much for saying that. That really helped me. And of course, all the essays are online. We'll be doing a panel that's a little different here in Continual, talking about coping strategies and what works for us. We're not necessarily mental health professionals. We can only say, well, you know, this works for me. And I deal with this. This is what helps me. But I think it matters a lot for us to see the people we respect, whether those are actors like Jared and Jensen and you know, Rob Benedict has a terrific chapter in Family Don't End with Blood, or authors or other people, to be able to say, wow, I identify. Maybe I'm not so weird after all. Look, that person over there is dealing with the same thing. That kind of makes me feel better because I'm not alone. And I think that I'm not alone piece is so big in all of this. What other thoughts? Are there groups out there that have those supernatural fandom ties that we haven't mentioned? You've brought up a couple that I wasn't aware of, so that's terrific.
There definitely are, and I'm unfortunately blanking. April, do you have, and I have some comments on what you said, but I didn't want to jump in if April wanted to respond too. So I'll just keep going. I think I really want to check out the blog you mentioned. I think it's really powerful. And I've said this before, I'm fortunate that I have privilege and I can disclose that I have mental health issues. I do. I've had depression. I have severe anxiety, and I have obsessive compulsive disorder. And I live with those. And I think I'm fortunate in that I can choose whether to disclose that or not, because people don't necessarily see that about me or assume that, unless they see me at cons washing my hands a lot, which prepared me very well for COVID, I will say. Okay, jokes aside, I'm a teacher, and when I stand in front of a room of students and can disclose and say things like, you know, I struggle with anxiety. This is a really difficult time. I get it. And I will have students come up after class and say, I really appreciate you saying that. And I validate them and say, look, if you are having a mental health issue, to me, that's no different from having a physical health issue. If you cannot come to class because this is going on for you, let me know. You don't have to go into detail. If you need connection to resources, I'm here for you. I get it because I've been there. I've had days where I've needed that space, and I try to be patient with myself and patient with others in that identity. But I say that I think disclosure is important because it also models for folks that you can be very functional and very you can live with this. It's hopeful is what I mean. Like you can be an amazing author, like you're sharing, you can be a successful publishing person. I have a PhD. I have 3 kids, I'm married. I have a lot of the markers, quote unquote, of, social success. And I'm very fortunate and I appreciate that. And you can do all this while also struggling with thinking about, how many times today you've washed your hands. That can have happen, but you can live with that. You can do it. You need help. That's cool. So I think that disclosure is really powerful. So I'll be quiet and let April share.
You're fine. I don't have a lot to contribute. I feel like I'm kind of here in dual roles, and I can't speak on behalf of Random Acts in their regards to that particular topic. But one of the things that pulled me into the fandom was the disclosure, was other people being willing to say the same thing. I'm in the same boat of depression, anxiety, and I have a master's in psychology. So being in that field where you're helping other people with those same issues while you're struggling with them yourself kind of has its own unique challenges. But getting to a place where I could share it, where I could choose to disclose it with my patients, with my clients, with my family, was a really important step. And I don't think I would have taken it had I not seen it kind of modeled for me within the fandom first.
One of the things I've talked about pretty openly, both at conventions and in the Hold On to the Light essays, and then in my chapter that I wrote for Lynn Zbernus's There'll Be Peace When You Are Done about Supernatural's legacy, is how the fandoms in my life, I believe, saved my life. The first one that I came into was the original Star Trek series in reruns. And given the very dysfunctional background I had come from, the idea that the world was going to be around and that there could be a good future was revolutionary for me and made a huge impact, not just in terms of what I ended up doing for a living, but in terms of dealing with that depression and anxiety, that this was the first time I had ever seen a hopeful future modeled. And it just blew me away. And so fandom, connecting with other people who loved those same things and who saw the magic and the inspiration in them, sustained me and has sustained me for decades, because that's really become my people. And I think that getting the word out to folks who love geeky things, who love nerdy things, who may not like the things that are so popular, like big sports or things like that. Find your people, find your family in fandoms. And no, it's not perfect, and yes, sometimes people behave badly, but for the most part, there is such a wonderful supportive network there, and a validation that you're okay for liking the things you like. And I think that that's a key message. Fandom kind of becomes the way we find each other and support each other and take care of our own, which cycles right back to where we started with all of this. Any last words? Believe it or not, the time has flown. So any last words you want to make? And then of course, I'll be glad to, watch the credits, and I'll have the websites there in the credits, so we don't have to, you don't have to grab a pen for that, but please tell us where we can find you online, and also any last remarks. April?
I'll start. Randomax.org is the website. For the next several weeks, our focus is actually mental health. So we're asking people to do mental health acts of kindness, including self-care. Hashtag it with hashtag get kind. We have a different focus every 2 or 3 months. You can get more information on our website. There's also on our homepage how to submit an act if you're looking to spread a little kindness and do something right now to make a difference. You can go to our website, and you can follow us on Twitter at randomacts.org.
Okay, great. Tanya.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, I remembered some other organizations. So just mentioning two really quickly, of course, Wayward Daughters, check them out. They still work on things. And also SPN Rescue, which is a group formed to help actually rescue folks after Hurricane Harvey. And they literally helped the Cajun Navy save lives. I mean, and I'm wondering now if they're kicking up again with hurricane season. Okay, so that is SPN Rescue and Wayward Daughters. And also, this is my study. Always keep nerd fighting. You can find us on Twitter at @AK Nerd Fighting.
Awesome.
And I'm Tanya Cook. I'm searchable too.
As Gail Z Martin, I'm pretty easy to find, gailzmartin.com. Hold On to the Light has a website, holdontothelight.com, and a Facebook group, #HoldOnToTheLight, all one word, where you can find all of those things. Hey, look, our time is up. So yeah, pretty easy to find, and I'll put all of this into the credits so people can pause the video and watch it. But thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for all the wonderful things you've been part of here and for helping to share this. So thank you very much for all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.